So I recently did a video where I showed you how to assemble a set of golf clubs just using very basic tools and supplies. We didn't use any elaborate or expensive club making equipment. It was very basic stuff. And you saw how simple it was to get professional looking results from very basic materials and supplies. But I've gotten a number of questions after that about, well, how does that apply to graphite shafts? So today we are going to do a graphite reshaft. We're going to use the same kinds of simple basic tools and supplies, a couple little tweaks, there's a couple differences, but we're going to go through the whole process and you will once again see how simple it is to get professional looking results using very simple supplies and equipment. So let's go. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Club Maker. I'm AJ, I hope you're having a wonderful day. We are going to dive right into this because, again, we've had some questions about, well, how is graphite different from steel? So I'm going to show you basically the differences you need to use in technique and maybe the slight differences you're going to need in some of the equipment that you're using, some of the tools. But overall, you will see very similar, whether it's steel or graphite, just a couple things to be aware of. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to get out in the open, draw attention to, is this idea that if you're wanting to do shaft work, if you're wanting to reshaft, if you're wanting to work on graphite shafted golf clubs, that you need a shaft puller. That being a tool that basically you clamp the shaft into it and it pulls the head off nice and straight and level, and it doesn't twist it or bend it. And if you have a shaft puller, it's great. And I would say if you plan on doing this with any sort of regularity, a shaft puller is definitely an investment that I would recommend making. But it's not something you need as long as, and this is the caveat, as long as you aren't trying to save the old shaft. If you are pulling graphite shafts and you don't care about reusing that shaft and putting it in a different club, you do not need a shaft puller. You can get away with just using a vise and some heat. But if you do want to save that shaft, if you have a shaft that you're wanting to either put into a different club or maybe possibly try something different and then maybe come back to that shaft again down the road, then a shaft puller is going to be something you're going to want to invest in. Okay, so what are we going to need for this first part? Well, obviously a vise is always extremely helpful. So if you have that vise, that is going to be good. Also, our rubber shaft clamp to hold the shaft. Also, some work gloves, shop gloves that you can hold on to hot things with. And then you're going to need either a heat gun or a torch of some kind to be able to heat up the old epoxy. Okay, so here's what we're going to be doing in this case. We're going to clamp this in here. We're just going to heat up this hosel. Get it good and warm and soften up that epoxy. This particular shaft adapter is made completely out of aluminum, so we don't have to worry about anything melting. Some adapters are going to have a plastic ferrule at the top that you would have to either try and save with wrapping in wet towels or just get a replacement ferrule for it or a different ferrule for it. But this one is just one piece of aluminum, so we don't have to worry about that. So we're just going to heat this up. Make sure our vise is good and tight on the shaft while we're heating. And okay, at this point, we're just going to see, giving it a little twist and a pull, and see if we can get it to break loose. And I think it just did. Again, if you were trying to save this shaft, you would never want to twist and pull because you are going to ruin it. But in our case, come on. Here it comes. There it goes. Come on. In our case, we can just twist it and pull it off. There we go. Now, as you can see, take this out of here. Now, as you can see, we have, in fact, like I said, ruined this shaft. I mean, once you start twisting it and bending it, that shaft is junk unless you plan on, you know, cutting it down here somewhere and reinstalling it as a shorter shaft. Try and get the majority of the old epoxy out of it while it's still nice and warm. It'll come out easily, just like that. Okay. You can set that aside, let that cool off for a minute. Okay, while that's cooling off, the next step is going to be we are going to prep this shaft. What we need to do with this shaft, because this is going into a 3 hybrid, we're going to be tipping it 1 inch and then prepping it, aka taking this paint off it just to get down past the paint so the epoxy bonds better to the actual carbon fiber. First, we need to mark off 1 inch. And what you want to do with graphite, especially if you're cutting it by hand without any sort of power tool, is you want to wrap the area that you're going to be cutting with some masking tape. So we're just going to eyeball it first, say that's going to be around where 1 inch is, and then we're going to actually measure 1 inch, and right there. Okay, so there's our inch we need to take off. What we're going to do is just put this into the vise right up against, get about as close as you can get and still be able to have access to cut it, but keep it pretty close. It'll make cutting it easier. We're going to tighten that down, and then we're just going to use a basic hacksaw. The trick to this is getting a hacksaw blade with as many teeth as you can get, basically. This is 32 TPI, teeth per inch. That's probably the ideal number. You would like it to be around that 32 TPI to give you a clean cut and not have issues with the shaft splintering. So once you have your shaft locked in the vise, then we're just going to cut it just back and forth, very smooth, very even strokes. Don't force it. Nice and smooth, just like that. And there you go. That took, I don't know, 45 seconds or so. Now you'll find if you cut it by hand, you will sometimes get a few of these little fibers that break off just like that. You can see right here. Don't worry about those. You can just kind of break those off a little bit. Once you start sanding everything down and removing the paint, it'll even everything out. You don't have to worry about that. Again, we're going to use some masking tape just to make sure that we don't over prep as far as going too high up here. So we're going to take this, hopefully it's not too hot, which it is not at this point. And we are going to, well, we may have to prep it a little before we can get it on there because I can't quite fit it. So sometimes with these graphite shafts, there's a pretty wide variety when it comes to the amount of paint, as far as the thickness of paint that they apply. In some cases, it's a very small amount, and in some cases, it's a lot of paint. So you may not be able to just fit the shaft into the head with the paint still on it because the paint just adds extra thickness to it. So we're going to put this again back in the clamp, and then just get out our good old medium grit sandpaper and just work our way around. Twist it 90 degrees. Twist it 90 degrees again. As you can see, once you take that paint off and sand it a little bit, you can't even see where you had that little basic splintery part. It just gets smoothed out and evened up with the rest of it. So don't have to worry about that. So there you go. That looks about right. Because the ferrule's already pre-installed, we want to make sure that we didn't over prep the shaft and have raw shaft sticking out of the bottom. So that looks good. So that all looks good. I am not going to weight this shaft at all. I think the old shaft, it looks like had a slight lead, tungsten, some sort of weight that was put in there. I am not going to weight this at all because this shaft that's going in it is a good bit heavier than the shaft that was in it before. So the swing weight should come out to be pretty comparable to where it was before. Again, if you have questions about swing weight, I would definitely go and look in my past video where I show you how to use that swing weight calculator, and you can use that. But at this point, let's get everything set up and we will epoxy this together. This is going to be some tour set, basically 30-60 style epoxy. Next, got a little acetone. We're going to clean up that head, that hosel, for any leftover epoxy that may have gotten stuck in there that we didn't get out with the wire brush. Just a little bit of epoxy down into the hosel. Now we're going to put a little bit of epoxy on the shaft. Again, we're just going to coat the areas that we sanded off. Okay. And let's put it together. Again, rotating as we install it. Now let's just get our logos lined up. So we've got this line here on the back. We can use that and line up our Mitsubishi logos. That looks pretty darn good right there. Again, the ferrule was all part of this, so you don't have any epoxy squeezing out here. You may have a little bit of epoxy squeezing out of the top. We're going to wipe this off twice. We're going to wipe it off once, just with a dry paper towel. And we're going to wipe it off once with a little bit of paper towel with just a tiny drop of grip solvent, just to remove any residual grip solvent that may, any residual epoxy that may have gotten on the club. And just real gently wipe that off. I also sometimes will, or usually will, wipe the shaft a little bit, just like this, just in case you had any sort of epoxy on your fingers. Just like that. That looks pretty good. Again, just like with the shaft, you don't want any epoxy. I'll also get, again, using a clean section of that towel, just go ahead and wipe the head also, because maybe even worse than having a fingerprint on the shaft would be having an epoxy fingerprint that dries on the head. So there, it looks nice, shiny, beautiful. We'll set this to dry, come back, cut it, and grip it. So we're going to go ahead and cut this shaft down to length. I've already measured it and put a mark here. Again, just like we did before, we're going to want to wrap this shaft in a little bit of masking tape because we are cutting it by hand. I'm going to try and get it as close to the vise as possible. It's going to make cutting it much easier. And here we go. Take this out, tap it, because you'll have some leftover residue inside the shaft. All right, all that's left is to grip it, and we're ready to go. Okay, we've just finished everything up. I think you can see from this video that this was actually an extremely easy club to do because we didn't have to turn down a ferrule or pick out a ferrule or match anything up because the ferrule piece is just all part of this adapter. So that made this particular club very simple to do. But as you can see, the tools we used, again, we had the vise, the sandpaper, the acetone, the Q-tip, a hacksaw in this case instead of the pipe cutter, and of course the heat gun or a torch to get the head off of the original shaft. But all of that, you know, very simple stuff to use, very simple stuff to find as far as those tools go. Again, you don't need a shaft extractor if you're just going to be pulling the shafts and getting rid of them. If you're not trying to save the shafts, you do not need a shaft extractor. However, if you are trying to save those shafts, then definitely look into getting one, because otherwise, if you do it the way we did it here, those shafts are ruined and you will not be able to reuse them again. Okay, that's it for today. Hey, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon. I'm on Instagram at Mobile Club Maker. We'll see you next time. Bye.